When was the last time someone you know actually moved to Dubai and told you it changed their life? Not visited. Not went for a long weekend and posted photos from a rooftop pool. Actually packed their things, signed a lease, found a job, built a life there, and told you honestly that the calculation worked out. Think about it for a second, because 5 years ago, that story was everywhere. In your LinkedIn feed, in your group chats, at dinner parties where someone always knew someone who had made the move and was killing it. Tax-free, sun-soaked, saving more in 12 months than they had in 3 years back home. That story was so common it became a genre. And now something has shifted. The story is still being told, but it sounds different. It comes with more caveats, more pauses, more of a sense that the person telling it is trying to convince themselves as much as they are trying to convince you. This video is about that shift. Not the dramatic version, not the collapse narrative that financial media reaches for whenever a hot market starts to cool, but the slower, more honest, more structurally important story of what happens when a city builds its entire identity around a promise, and that promise starts to fray at the edges. Dubai is not dying, but the dream of Dubai, the specific dream that captured the imagination of millions of professionals, investors, and families over the last decade, that dream is slowly, quietly, and very measurably changing shape. To understand what is happening now, you have to remember what the original offer actually was. And you have to remember it with genuine respect, because it was a remarkable offer. Dubai sold something that almost no other city in the world could credibly sell at scale. It sold the complete package. Zero income tax on salaries that were already globally competitive. A real estate market that was both affordable relative to London or Singapore and appreciating fast enough to generate wealth. A lifestyle infrastructure, the malls, the restaurants, the beaches, the international schools that matched or exceeded what you would find in the most expensive postcodes of Western cities, but at a fraction of the cost once you factored in the tax advantage. And underneath all of that, it sold certainty, safety, political stability in a region that the rest of the world associated with instability. Dubai was selling a Swiss bank account you could actually live inside. That was the product. So not the Burj Khalifa, not the indoor ski slope. The product was the feeling that the math worked and that it would keep working, and that the rules of the game would not change on you in the middle of playing it. For roughly a decade, from the post-2008 recovery through the post-pandemic boom, that offer held. And the numbers were staggering. Dubai's population grew from around 2 million residents in 2010 to more than 4 million by 2025, a doubling in 15 years driven almost entirely by voluntary migration. People voted with their feet, and for a long time, the vote was overwhelming. But here's the first thing that the official tourism and investment boards will not put in their brochures. The deterioration in that promise did not begin with any single event. It began with arithmetic. Let us be precise about the numbers, because precision is the only honest way to tell this story. According to the Mercer Cost of Living City ranking released in June 2025, Dubai now ranks 15th most expensive city in the world and is the single most expensive city in the entire Middle East. That ranking alone is not the problem. The problem is what it sits next to. Cooper Fitch, a Dubai-based recruitment agency whose United Arab Emirates Salary Guide 2025 surveyed business leaders from over 1,000 organizations across the country, projected that average salaries across the Emirates would record a net increase of 0% in 2025, despite expected gross domestic product growth of around 5%. Zero. Not a small increase, not below inflation. Zero. At the same time, the real estate advisory firm Cavendish Maxwell documented rental growth across Dubai's residential market of 13% year-on-year in 2025, following double-digit increases in each of the 2 years prior. Put those two data points next to each other, and you have the structural compression that is quietly reshaping who can actually afford to stay. A one-bedroom apartment in a central Dubai neighborhood, in areas like Dubai Marina or downtown, now averages around 8,700 dirhams per month, which is approximately $2,369 every month, or just over $28,000 per year, just for rent, before utilities, before groceries. Idean before the mandatory private health insurance that runs between 3,000 and 7,000 dirhams annually for a basic to mid-range plan, before school fees that can reach 150,000 dirhams a year for a family with children in an international curriculum school. Hasnain Malik, Managing Director for Emerging and Frontier Markets Equity Strategy at the global data provider Telemer, put it plainly in late 2024 when he said that deteriorating affordability is a risk for medium-term population growth in Dubai. That is not a fringe view. That is a senior analyst at a major data institution describing a structural crack in the foundation of the dream. And Rizwan Tahir, professor of global management at the Rochester Institute of Technology, Dubai, was even more direct. He's telling Business Insider that the disparity between escalating living costs and stagnant salaries poses genuine financial challenges for many expatriates. These are not critics from outside the system. These are people embedded in it. Now here's the part that complicates the story in ways the simple collapse narrative misses. And this is where it gets important to be precise. The stress is not uniform. It never is. Dubai in 2026 is not one market, one labor pool, or one social reality. It is at least three completely different cities occupying the same geography. And the question of whether the dream is dying depends entirely on which of those cities you are asking about. For the ultra-wealthy, the family offices, the high-net-worth individuals, on the tier of buyer who purchased more than 590 homes priced above 20 million dirhams in just the first quarter of 2025 alone, Dubai remains one of the most rational places on earth to park capital and call home. Gross rental yields averaging 6.76% citywide, with no income tax, no capital gains tax, no inheritance tax, in a politically stable jurisdiction with a dollar-pegged currency and world-class infrastructure. For this layer, the affordability crisis is background noise. They are not affected by it and they never were. But for the professional middle class, the expat engineers, the marketing directors, the mid-level finance professionals, the teachers at international schools, the people who made up the bulk of Dubai's post-pandemic migration wave, the arithmetic is turning. Fiona Robson, the head of the Edinburgh Business School at Heriot-Watt University, Dubai, noted that salary stagnation may simply reflect a market where employers no longer need to offer premium compensation because there are already enough qualified candidates to fill positions without it. In other words, Dubai's success at attracting talent has, paradoxically, begun to erode the financial case for being there. A recent workforce survey found that nearly 70% of UAE employees reported that rising costs of living were significantly outpacing their salaries, and that two-thirds of those workers were considering leaving their positions within 3 months. Two-thirds. And then there is the third layer, the one that almost never appears in the investment prospectuses or the tourism campaigns. In the 8.7 million migrant workers who make up over 80% of the entire country's resident population, according to the International Labor Organization. The construction workers building the towers that investors will buy. The hospitality staff running the hotels that tourists will rate on 5 stars. The domestic workers in the villas of the expats who are themselves feeling the squeeze. These workers often arrive having paid recruitment fees that can trap them in conditions close to debt bondage before they earn their first paycheck, as documented by Human Rights Watch and the Human Rights Group, Equitim in investigations spanning from the construction boom through the renewable energy projects of 2024. They work in temperatures that reach 42 degrees Celsius, sometimes during periods when outdoor work is legally banned. The dream was never theirs, but they are the ones who build it every day. Here is where it becomes necessary to look not just at the living costs and the salary data, but at the real estate market itself, because the property story in Dubai in 2026 contains a structural warning that is only now beginning to reach the mainstream financial press. In May 2025, Fitch Ratings, one of the 3 major global credit rating agencies, issued a forecast predicting a price correction of up to 15% in Dubai's residential real estate market, concentrated in the second half of 2025 running through 2026. The reason was not a financial crisis or a geopolitical shock. The reason was supply. Moody's estimates that more than 150,000 new homes will be delivered in the UAE between 2025 and 2027, representing approximately 20% of Dubai's entire existing housing stock, arriving in the market in 2 years. Fitch's own estimate is even sharper, projecting nearly 250,000 units over the same period, with 120,000 units scheduled for handover in 2026 alone. To put that in perspective, Dubai's housing supply is growing at approximately 16% per year, while population growth is running at around 5%. That 11 percentage point gap is, in Fitch's own language, not sustainable. The mid-market apartment segment is the most exposed. Areas like Jumeirah Village Circle, where alone nearly 25,000 new units are expected to be delivered by 2027, face the prospect of meaningful vacancy pressure and price compression. Anton Lopatin, senior director at Fitch Ratings, told the national newspaper directly that the incoming supply will likely put pressure on both prices and rents in the emirate. This is not a blogger's opinion, this is Fitch. And it is worth noting that this warning was issued before accounting for the possibility of any external shock to demand. The dream that Dubai sold so effectively was never truly one dream. It was several different promises bundled under a single brand, and they are now unbundling at different speeds for different people. But the unbundling itself is not the deepest story. The deepest story is that the vulnerabilities enabling it were always there, visible to anyone willing to look past the skyline. The first vulnerability is the one Fitch identified. Dubai built its real estate market on a model of perpetual construction and perpetual demand, and perpetual demand requires perpetual immigration of people with sufficient purchasing power. When the talent pool deepens faster than the economy can absorb it at premium salary levels, the model begins to strain. The second vulnerability is the absence of a domestic demand buffer. Unlike London or New York or Singapore, where a large portion of residents are citizens with generational ties to place, career routes, family networks, and community anchors that make leaving a meaningful decision, Dubai's population is almost entirely composed of people who came by choice and can leave by choice. And approximately 87% of Dubai's residents are non-citizens, according to government data. That is not a flaw in Dubai's design. It is a deliberate feature of the economic model. But it means that when the cost-benefit calculation shifts, even marginally for a large enough cohort, the outflow can be swift and self-reinforcing. The third vulnerability is what might be called the safety premium problem. Dubai's most powerful and unique selling proposition was always stability in an unstable region, security as a product, certainty as a lifestyle feature. That premium commands a price, and people have historically been willing to pay it. But a premium that is priced into rents, into property values, into salary expectations is a premium that only retains its value as long as the underlying asset. The perception of safety and predictability remains intact. A fourth vulnerability, one that is rarely discussed with the directness it deserves, is the near-total compression of Dubai's tourism and expat appeal into a single seasonal window. The summer months, from roughly June through September, effectively suspend significant portions of outdoor Dubai. Vacancy rates in the rental market are projected by CoLife to peak during July and September 2026 precisely because of this, as business activity slows and residents with the means to leave temporarily do. A city whose climate makes it functionally uncomfortable for 4 months a year has a structural ceiling on the depth of organic cultural life it can develop, and it is cultural depth. The organic neighborhoods, the street life, the local institutions that survive economic cycles, that ultimately anchors a city's identity in the minds of people choosing where to build a life. Even the Dubai Tourism Board's own leadership has, in various forms, acknowledged that the city needs to build more of what they call soul, meaning experiences that feel authentic rather than constructed, rooted rather than deployed. That admission from inside the establishment is perhaps the most telling data point of all. So where does that leave Dubai in 2026 and beyond? The honest answer is that it leaves Dubai in a place it has been before and successfully navigated. The city's residential prices dropped sharply after the 2008 global financial crisis and fell again after the 2014 oil price collapse, and in both cases, Dubai rebuilt its momentum within a few years. The post-pandemic recovery between 2021 and 2024 produced a 60% run-up in residential values that no serious analyst had predicted, and that recovery was real, documented, and driven by genuine demand. That resilience is not a marketing fiction. It is a historical fact, and ignoring it would make this analysis dishonest. What is different now is the specific combination of pressures. A supply wave of unprecedented scale arriving precisely as salary stagnation erodes the purchasing power of the middle tier resident base. A cost of living structure that is no longer obviously favorable compared to second tier cities in Europe or Southeast Asia that are aggressively positioning themselves for the same mobile professional class, and a global conversation about remote work, second passports, and geographic diversification that has expanded the competitive set for Dubai's attention. The recovery path, if there is one, runs through structural change rather than cyclical rebound. It runs through genuine affordability mechanisms for the professional middle class that built the city's daily economy. It runs through supply regulation that aligns construction pipelines with actual absorption capacity rather than developer enthusiasm. It runs through a deepening of the city's cultural infrastructure that makes it a place people stay in because they want to, rather than because the contract has not expired yet. Whether those changes happen is a genuinely open question. Dubai's leadership has shown, historically, a capacity for rapid and decisive policy intervention when it perceives a structural threat. The Golden Visa expansion, the remote work permits, the regulatory reforms in the labor market, these were not small moves. They were strategic pivots executed at speed. The question is whether the current set of pressures reads as a genuine structural threat or as a routine cycle of cooling after a hot run. The answer to that question will determine whether Dubai in 2030 looks like the dream that 4 million people came to find, or a more complicated, more stratified, more honestly human version of what a city in the middle of an ambitious century actually looks like. If you have lived in Dubai, or if you were in the middle of deciding whether to go, I genuinely want to know whether the calculation has changed for you, not the abstract version, the real one. And if this kind of deep analysis of what is actually happening in the cities that everyone is watching is what you come here for, you already know what to do.